Welcome to the SBI Podcast, offering CEOs, sales and marketing leaders ideas to make the number.
Welcome SBI Podcast listeners and video podcast viewers. My name is John Staples and I'm a partner at SBI, a sales and marketing consultancy dedicated to helping you make your number. With me today is one of SBI's principals, Mark Sinek. What's up, Mark?
Looking forward to the show today, John.
Hey, the goal of our show is to help you make your number by speaking with sales and marketing experts on topics that include market research, corporate product marketing, sales, and talent strategies. I'm excited for our audience to hear from today's guest, Jim Foxworthy, president of Pragmatic Marketing. What I love about Jim's career path is he's a grinder. As an example, Pragmatic Marketing, Jim attended the very first Pragmatic Marketing training course ever held, spent the next 7 years implementing the framework, then served as both an instructor of the Pragmatic Marketing curriculum and independent certified consultant helping companies implement the framework to become more tuned to their markets. This varied experience makes Jim uniquely suited for his role as president of Pragmatic Marketing.
Now, for those of you who are not familiar with Pragmatic Marketing, they provide practical, actionable training that attendees can implement the day they get back to the office. The Pragmatic Marketing Framework is a market-driven model for managing and marketing technology products. We have the framework on the screen for those viewing the show. For those on the podcast, you can find the framework at pragmaticmarketing.com. Jim, thank you for joining the show.
Thank you both very much. It's a pleasure to be here.
Okay, today we're going to discuss product launch execution in order to achieve the product's business objectives. And to do that, we're going to use a section of SBI's revenue growth methodology to guide our conversations, specifically Phase 12 of the product strategy section, which is on pages 104 to 106. If you want to follow along at home, download a copy of our methodology at www.salesbenchmarkindex.com/2016-report. So let's get started. Jim, how should companies determine their time objectives for launching new products?
Well, it all goes back to the heart of what we talk about in our training seminars and a concept that we share with you folks at SBI. And that is that before you embark on any investment whatsoever, you should be able to answer a very simple yet important question. What problem are we trying to solve? When you can answer the question, what problem are we trying to solve, and do so in the words of the buyer, in the words of the user, you can guarantee that the context of all the work that you do going forward is grounded in the needs of the market. We have a sort of a unfortunate history, particularly in technology organizations, of building things because we can, not because we should. And so that's why this question is so important, and we should ask it of ourselves always. And I would say that if you're in the middle of working on a particular product launch, even right now, maybe you've got deadlines you have to meet, you've got a checklist in front of you, and there are things that are happening in the next 30, 60, 90 days, and you're maybe even panicked about it. Put the brakes on, put the coffee down, and stop and think. Can you answer the question? What problem are we trying to solve? And make sure you can say that in the words of the buyer and the user, not in feeds and speeds and feature speak, but in the words that they use, the language they use. That is the ultimate grounding. And from there, we can embark on different subordinate ideas for launch. But I want to hold right there and just make sure that makes sense to you guys, and if you have any thoughts or questions or you wanted to add.
That makes sense, Jim. So let's follow that up a little bit. And how do we measure progress against our launch objectives in the example you just gave?
Whenever you've got a clear understanding of what problem you're trying to solve, you also should have measured how urgent it is that that problem be solved, how pervasive it is, in other words, how many people or organizations have it, and what their willingness is to pay for a solution to make that problem go away. Ultimately, those metrics begin to drive your decision-making and begin to help you to determine whether or not you're accomplishing what you want in the launch. So let's back that up. If a problem that you're solving is particularly urgent for your target market segment, then I would expect adoption to be pretty rapid. If your target market segment that has this problem is relatively small in terms of number of potential buyers, but it's still pervasive across the segment. Let's say you're targeting large financial services organizations. Let's just pick something out of the air. And maybe there are scores of potential buyers as opposed to thousands of potential buyers. Then one of the metrics you'll be looking at is adoption, but the numbers might be relatively small. Hitting a few large accounts would be good metrics. And then lastly, under the category of willingness to pay, we could go off in a different direction on this, so I'm not going to try to take the tangent right now, but the price that we charge should be grounded in an understanding of what problem we're trying to solve. The price is not a reflection of what it costs you to build. It's a reflection of the value of making the problem go away. You can establish that price and then measure whether or not you're achieving that price as you're moving through the launch to ensure that the way you execute is staying in harmony with the client's willingness to pay.
Got it. Now, kind of a hot potato question for you, Jim, if I could. Where does product enablement live? Where should it live, in your opinion, and who owns it?
Who owns it is whomever has been outside the building interacting with real people in their native habitat and uncovering unsolved market problems, because that's, as I said before, that's the cornerstone of all of this work. Most often amongst our clients, that title is what we often hear called product management.
One of the key things I took away from looking around on your website and knowing a little bit about pragmatic marketing is one of the key tenets you can continually go back to is the answer doesn't lie in the building. And that goes to, I think, your point about whoever should own it is the person who's outside the building the most often. Fair enough?
Oh, totally. If you don't have that kind of street cred, then all you're doing is spouting your own opinions, or the way things used to be when you used to work in the market, or any variation of that. I mean, at the end of the day, the person who has that street credibility, when they talk, even in internal meetings, they don't start their sentences with, "Well, I think we should." Instead, they say, "Well, based on the last 5 face-to-face interviews that I conducted, I saw a pattern that looks like this. We did some market research to determine that it's pervasive in the market of 62% that, and now you're talking about really empowering an organization with outside-in data."
Hey, Jim, I guess a follow-up to that would be, do you have a couple of best practices our audience could benefit from when it comes to getting that market research? You said face-to-face interviews. Earlier you mentioned the buyer contacts. How about a couple of best practices for our audience to start with?
Wow. I don't think we have enough time for me to get into all the areas that I'm excited about when it comes to this. But at the end of the day, as we all know, face-to-face communication is always the richest, most robust form of interaction. You and I the three of us are not doing that right now, and it has an impact on how we're communicating with each other. You can do this kind of stuff over the phone if you're pinched for time, if you're pinched for money, T&E resources, that kind of thing. I'm good with that. There are ways to get there and still meet the same kind of goals to make sure that the business is tuned into the market. But at the end of the day, our preference is that you get right into, like I said, the native habitat of the people whose lives you're trying to change. And there's a couple of reasons for that. First of all, face-to-face communication is a richer form of dialogue. You can see body language and face expression and that sort of thing. The second thing is that you get oftentimes a good feel for what problems people are facing just by understanding what their work environment is like. Some years ago, I was working with a client that sold a fleet tracking solution, and part of the solution was used by dispatchers who were working in a dispatch hub. And if you've never sat in one of those, then you've never seen real chaos. And as a consequence, some of the design decisions were made based on understanding the frenetic pace and background noise and distractions and that sort of thing that particular user had to deal with on an hourly, daily basis. So getting out there to actually be able to observe is really, really powerful. A second best practice we typically recommend is that you travel at least in pairs when you go out into the real world to interact with people. The reason for that is because there's so much that happens with observation, not necessarily from the conversation. So let's say the two of you were coming to interview me, then maybe during part of the conversation, John and I are having a dialogue, then Mark, you're the observer, and you're seeing things about what's going on in our conversation. And the conversation naturally moves between me and Mark, and then, John, you become the observer. Well, when the two of you go away after the end of that interview and compare notes, it's almost like you were in two different meetings. And it makes it much more valuable to at least travel in pairs. And I can go forward from there, but that's just a couple of quick things.
No, that's great advice, and I like the pair reference. You know, we typically think about face-to-face interviews and gathering that feedback, but having a couple of folks in the room at the same time trying to understand that, I think, is great advice for our audience. Okay, let's take a short break and make the audience aware of one of SBI's offerings.
Each day, you receive hundreds of emails, tons of text messages, countless telephone calls, and sit in too many meetings. How do you find ideas to make the number with all this noise? The SBI blog filters all this nonsense for you and presents only first-rate ideas to make the number. Simplify your life. Subscribe to one blog and read the best content. Go to salesbenchmarkindex.com and subscribe today.
Welcome back. My name is John Staples, and I'm a partner at SBI, and I'm joined by my co-host, Mark Sinek, a principal at SBI. Our guest today is Jim Foxworthy, president of Pragmatic Marketing. Today, we're discussing product launch execution. We are using SBI's revenue growth methodology to guide our discussion. We're discussing pages 104 to 106 if you're following along at home. Let's continue the product launch discussion. Jim, can you explain to the audience how to develop product content needed to enable the marketing team?
That's a real simple answer, and the word is positioning. Positioning is it's one of those things that's oftentimes misunderstood in organizations about what it means. A lot of times positioning isn't even developed until we're right on top of the launch. Somebody says, hey, we need a positioning document because we need to produce marketing collateral or something along those lines. And certainly marketing collateral is one of the activities that gets great leverage from positioning. But the pragmatic marketing model puts a lot of emphasis on ensuring that the positioning document is produced before the business plan is completed. So it's way back up earlier in the workflow. And the reason why we believe that that's true is twofold. Number one, positioning isn't about features. Positioning isn't about all the different cool technology or things that you do in your products. Positioning is about people and their problems. And if you've been outside the building, as we were talking about before, and you understand what problem you're trying to solve, then you can craft your positioning document, frankly, before the product is even built. If you understand the key problems that you're going to be solving and who you're solving them for, and that second part is just as important, then you can draft your positioning, and that document then becomes part and parcel to the original investment initiative. And here's where it really becomes powerful. The positioning document is today in most firms, as I mentioned before, used as a leverage point for marketing communications people, and that's awesome. But if you have a positioning document in the time frame that I'm talking about, then the whole rest of the organization can benefit from it as well. For example, the development team, the engineering manufacturing team, whatever you call those people who build the products for you, can benefit by understanding what the key problems are that we're solving and who we're solving them for just as much as Marcom can. Everybody in the sales organization can begin to understand what's coming down the line and begin to think about what's going on in my territory, in my section of geography or my industry that I'm responsible for selling into. Who is it that looks like this profile that also has these problems? that begins to warm up the activity so that when you finally end up finishing the actual engineering effort, then the downstream pieces are already in place and ready to really fly.
That's perfect. So speaking of the downstream pieces, and I think this might be a good segue, let's talk about training for a moment. In the ideal world, what should the training program include to build the necessary product skills and knowledge? And if you could talk not only about the pieces of a training program, but also the sequence of a training program.
Mm-hmm. That's a great question. I've started in product management the very first time. Let's just go on record as saying a really long time ago. I was with an organization that got acquired. They abolished the department I was in and said, "You're a product manager." And I said, "What's that?" And they said, "I don't know. Go help the salespeople."
Yeah.
And that was pretty much the definition of the role that I got back then. That was, 1984. But here's the thing. I've learned, and we teach, that when you do product training, particularly with the sales part of the organization, the idea is not to teach how the product works. The idea is to teach how people will want to buy it. Not even how to sell it, because frankly, the people who are conducting the training are oftentimes not nearly as great and experts in how to sell it as the people in the audience. The key is to try to convey the market knowledge about who we're targeting, what the positioning is and the problems are that we're going to solve for these people, and then lastly, how those people like to buy. The buying process is what should dictate the selling process, not the other way around. And we learn that last particular piece of information when we're conducting market research, learning what the buying process is, by doing a very specific kind of market research called win-loss analysis. And we could spend 30 minutes just talking about win-loss, but at the end of the day, those are the underlying components to a good training program.
Fantastic. Let's take a quick break, if we could, and make the audience aware of one of SBI's offerings. Jim, we'll be right back with you.
You are watching SBI TV. This is a monthly web TV show featuring guests just like you, executives trying to grow their revenues. Each month, you can peek behind the scenes and watch your peers discuss their strategies for how they make their numbers. You are not going to want to miss this.
Welcome back. Mark and I are joined today by Jim Foxworthy, President at Pragmatic Marketing. Today we're discussing product launch execution, and we're using SBI's revenue growth methodology to guide our discussion. We're still working in phase 12, pages 104 to 106. Jim, let's jump back into the questions. How do we ensure the team knows what product enablement tools are available and how to use them?
We talked a little bit before we went on the break about understanding what the buying process is. One of the responsibilities of the marketing team in order to ensure that sales has what they need is to look at the transition points from step to step that the buyer goes through and identify what tools they need in order to make that transition. So, this is a real simple illustration, but let's just say that the first step the buyer goes through is to search online for using a particular set of keywords. The corresponding tool that we provide would be things that we make available out on the web. Our website itself may be places where we blog, social media, things like that. Perhaps the second step that the buyer goes through is to get some sort of peer feedback, one of the most trusted forms of feedback that all of our buyers depend on. And so what we do is we have clearly available reviews, case studies, referrals, things like that we make available, and on from there. As you guys state quite clearly in the executive summary of the report, that's the larger document that we're in the middle of now, a huge percentage, well over half of the buying process is completed by our buyers before they even engage with us. And so it's imperative to do, let me just kind of back it up a little bit, the win-loss analysis to understand the buying process and to make sure that we then map tools to each step in the buying process to empower the buyer as they work their way through that. And as we go through the training, what we'll do is we'll show the tools, how they map against the process, so the salesperson, when they're engaging with any particular buyer, can detect where they are in the sequence and guide them to the corresponding tool.
You know, Jim, I'd like to go back. We asked you in the first segment about where product enablement should live, and then John just asked you about the question you just answered around how you ensure the team knows what product enablement tools are available. So now, let's talk about coaching. How do we reinforce our product enablement strategy through ongoing coaching?
Well, there's a couple of different ways that can work. Obviously, in a sales organization itself, sales management has the responsibility to stay involved on individual opportunities to ensure that account managers in territory are working a particular opportunity in a way that is the most effective and the most powerful to get to close. So there's that. From a use of tools point of view, it's also totally useful to track how often certain tools are used. The marketing department has a lot of techniques that are available to them now to actually track when certain things are taken advantage of. If one of the steps early in the process is for us to increase awareness by sending out some sort of an email campaign, then we have click-through results and open ratios that we can look at to see whether or not they're being used. So there's coaching that goes on even outside of the sales organization to make sure that we're getting ROI back from the tools that we're using.
So I heard you mention two specific things there. First, sales management, and that's the age-old, has to be reinforced through a coaching cadence. And then I heard you mention the use of tools, and you mentioned click-through rates is a great way to kind of be able to evaluate that. And obviously there's a lot of different technologies out there that allow you to see how often the sales organization is consuming some of the enablement pieces. Anything else, or are those kind of the main two?
Well, those are perhaps more short-term, easily implementable, and maybe a little bit more tactical. At the end of the day, if you go back to win-loss analysis, you can look at the entire sequence of events that someone went through and evaluate what was effective about the enablement strategy and how do we make refinements along the way. We highly recommend that you use that sort of analysis technique by using someone who was not directly involved in the selling process itself, a third party, which can be somebody else inside your organization. You don't have to hire somebody from the outside, but we recommend that win-loss is conducted by someone who has not been part of the actual selling process.
Got it. Jim, let's take one more short break. We're going to make the audience aware of one of SBI's content offerings, and we will return to you very shortly.
Making your number is hard. Your problems are complex. Complex problems need complex solutions. Introducing the SBI Magazine. Read in-depth stories written by award-winning journalists about how your peers have overcome their problems to make the numbers. When you need more than a tweet, social post, or blog article, turn to the SBI Magazine. Go to salesbenchmarkindex.com to subscribe.
Welcome back, everyone. In our final segment, we're going to summarize the discussion and provide some action items for you to apply to your business today to help you make your number. Jim, let's put a bow on this. I'd like you to speak directly to the audience and say, what are the top 3 things you recommend our audience do immediately following this show to help them make their number?
The top 3 things that your audience should do, this audience should do to make their number are really very simple. Number 1, get outside the building. We have a phrase at Pragmatic Marketing that we talk about all the time. It's called NIHITO, N-I-H-I-T-O, and that stands for Nothing Important Happens in the Office. The people who drive the creation of product and the people who run that all the way down through marketing and launch and eventually to the sales organization need to make the very first thing they do is to get outside the building and make sure the decisions they're making are grounded in the reality of real people in their real habitats. Our job is to make people's problems go away. That's number one. Number two, we want to be really cautious when we do that to make sure that we don't build solutions for one or two examples of people we visited with. It's really tempting to go out on the road and visit with a handful of folks and not take the second step, which is, in classic market research sense, what's called validation, which means that you need to prove whether or not the problems you discovered during these interviews are pervasive and urgent and people are willing to pay to solve them. And the third thing is that once you have those two pieces of information, you are in a position to create your positioning document. And that single document, which we teach a great deal about how to do that in our training programs, can be a leverage for all parts of the organization. A good positioning document should be written early, and it can be leveraged by all parts of the organization, not just marketing, communications, and sales.
That was great. I have a phrase, too. It's called mojito, and it might be a little different from your acronym, but I appreciate that. I'm going to remember that, and I think our audience will as well. Okay. What does all this mean to you, the audience? It means even with great marketing and great sales, without great product launch, you'll more than likely miss your number.
If you want to make sure you get this right, you can get a copy of SBI's annual research methodology called How to Make Your Number in 2016 at www.salesbenchmarkindex.com/2016-report. And if you're interested in learning more about product launch execution, we can have one of our experts lead you through a workshop using this report, which will detail how to do it. Go to salesbenchmarkindex.com to request a workshop. Jim, thanks for sharing this, and thanks for appearing today. Your perspective with our audience, we really appreciate it, and I know the audience benefited greatly. I also want to thank you, the audience, for tuning in. This show has become very popular, and with this popularity comes our ability to get great guests like we had today. So thank you, and we wish you much success as you try to make your number.
This has been the SBI Podcast. For more information on SBI services, case studies, the SBI team and how we work, or to subscribe to our other offerings, please visit us at salesbenchmarkindex.com.